Welcome to the main session on the governance of AI. My name is Kathleen Siemann. I lead an AI project at the German development agency GIZ. The project is called Fair Forward. I will be moderating this session today together with Guilherme. Guilherme, maybe you introduce yourself as well.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Guilherme Canella, and I'm the director in UNESCO in charge of digital transformation, inclusion and policies. Real pleasure to be here with Kathleen and this fantastic panel.
Yes. So Guilherme and I are very excited to have representatives from different regions and sectors here on the panel that will discuss AI governance with us. And dear panelists, thank you so much for coming. Let me briefly introduce you. So to our left, we have Melinda Claybor, Director of Privacy Policy at Meta. Welcome, Melinda. And next to Melinda sits Jovan Kobalia, Executive Director of Diplo Foundation, based in Geneva, but with a background from Eastern Europe. And next to you, Jovan, sits Jalak Kakar. Welcome, Jalak. Happy to have you. Jalak Kakar is the Executive Director of the Center for Communication Governance in New Delhi, India. And we are very happy also to welcome you, Mlindi Moshlogu. You are filling in for the Deputy Minister from South Africa, from the Ministry of Communications and Digital Technology. And your title is you are the Deputy Director General at the Ministry. Thank you all for coming, and very sad that Mondli couldn't come. He was affected by the recent activities in Israel and Iran, and his flight could not come through. Well, everyone, thank you for coming. Before you will be able to set the scene from your perspective, I would love to give a brief introduction on what we perceive under AI governance at the moment, and also give us an idea how to discuss this further. As this IGF's theme is building digital governance together, we want to discuss how we can shape AI governance together, as we still observe different levels and possibilities of engagement in sectors and regions. I would say that currently the AI governance landscape is blooming. Yes, we have AI governance tools like principles, processes, and bodies emerging globally, and I think somehow we also can lose track in that blooming landscape, just to name a few. So in 2019, the OECD issued its AI principles, followed by UNESCO's recommendations on the ethics of AI in 2022. In 2023, I don't know if you remember still, but AI companies such as OpenAI, Alphabet, and Meta made also voluntary commitments to implement measures like watermarking AI-generated content. And finally, last year, the EU AI Act came into force as the first legal framework for governing AI. Additionally, existing fora and groups are addressing AI and its governance. For example, last year, the G7 launched the Hiroshima AI process, and G20 has declared AI a key priority this year, and I think we'll be hearing more about that from you, Mlindi, later. And then we have also various declarations and endorsement and significant communications issued by many, like the Africa AI Declaration that was signed in Kigali, for example, or the Declaration on Responsible AI that was signed in Hamburg recently. And as a core document for 193 member states, the UN's Global Digital Compact calls for concrete actions for global AI governance by establishing, for example, a global AI policy dialogue and a scientific panel on AI. So when we look at all these efforts, it seems like AI governance is not only a blooming, but also a fragmented landscape with different levels and possibilities of engagement. So how do you, dear panelists, perceive this? And what are your perspectives, but also ideas on the current AI governance? What should be changed? What is missing? We would love to start with your perspective, Melinda, from the private sector. Feel free to use the next 3 to 4 minutes for an introduction statement. And yes, there you go.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a little perspective to set the context. from where Meta sits in this conversation. So at Meta, I think everyone's familiar with our products and our services, our social media and messaging apps. But in the AI space, we sit at two places. One, we are a developer of large language models, foundational Gen AI models. They're called Llama, and many of you might be familiar with them or familiar with applications built on top with them. So we are a developer in that sense, and we focus largely on open source as the right approach to building large generative AI models. At the same time, we build on top of models and we provide applications and systems through our products. So we're kind of in both camps, just to situate folks. I was glad that you laid out I mean, it really, in the last couple of years, it's incredible the number of frameworks and commitments and principles and policy frameworks. It's head spinning at times, having lived through that. And so I think it is really important to remember there's no lack of governance in this space. But I do think that we are at an interesting inflection point. And I think we're all kind of wondering, well, what now? We set down these principles. We have these frameworks. Companies like Meta, for example, has put out a frontier AI framework that sets out how we assess for catastrophic risks when we're developing our models and what steps we take to mitigate them. And yet, there's still a lot of questions and concerns. And I think we're at this inflection point for a few reasons. One, we don't necessarily agree on what the risks are and whether there are risks and how we quantify them. So I think we see different regions and countries want to focus more on innovation and opportunity. Other folks want to focus more on safety and the risks. There's also a lack of technical agreement and scientific agreement about risks and how they should be measured. I think there's also an interesting inflection point in regulation. The EU, for example, was very fast to move to regulate AI with the landmark AI Act. And I think it's running into some problems. I think there's now kind of a consensus amongst key policymakers and voices in the EU that maybe we went too far, and actually we don't know whether this is really tied to the state of the science and how to actually implement this in a way. And now they're looking to pause and reconsider certain aspects of digital regulation in Europe. So, and then a lot of countries are kind of looking for what to do and are looking for solutions for how to actually adopt and implement AI. And so I don't think I have an easy answer, but I think we are at a moment to kind of take stock and say, okay, we've talked about risk. Can we talk about opportunity? Can we talk about enabling innovation? Can we broaden this conversation about what we're talking about and who we're talking with, and making sure the right voices, the right representation from little tech to big tech, from all corners of the world, are represented to have these conversations about governance.
Thank you very much, Linda. I would love to continue with you, Mlindi, and giving us the perspective from the South African government. How do you perceive the current landscape? What is important to you at the moment?
Thank you, Kathleen, for that. I think from the South African government, what we see, I think it's a general knowledge that we see that AI is a true general purpose technology, which is the same as like your electricity or internet, but also it does affect various sectors of our economy. But also, we see that, with such a power, transformative power, so it comes with the responsibility, which we want to ensure that, the AI systems are not only effective, but also, they are ethical, inclusive, and accountable. So I think it's one of the first things that we want to do. But also to govern AI effectively, we're trying to come with a shared vocabulary and principled, foundation, as reflected in some initiatives that you mentioned before, like OECD principles, UN high-level advisory board on AI. But also, we just need to also focus on making sure that we do have required sector-specific policy interventions, that are technically informed and locally relevant. So that's what we're trying to do, because we see that if we were to look on AI in financial services, it would be different in regulating it in AI in, say, agriculture. So we're trying to come, with different, methods of regulating AI. But also, some of the areas that we are focusing on as a government as well is, from the regional point of view, is to make sure that, our approach is grounded from the principle of data justice, which also puts, human rights, economic equity, as well as environmental sustainability, at the center of AI. But also we recognize that, the technological advancements, must serve further as a public good, but also not to reinforce, the historical inequities. So that's one of the concrete proposals that we are looking into. But also the other area that we're focusing on is the area of sufficient explainability, which is the requirement for the AI decisions. It's one of the areas that we're advocating, especially, those that impact, human lives and livelihood. So we see those decisions, they need to be transparent, interpretable as well as contestable, Because if you were to look on the areas of, say, for instance, the credit scoring, predictive policing, healthcare diagnostics, we need to have a right to understand how these decisions have actually come, and how the AI systems actually make those decisions. But also further from that, one of the areas that we are furthering as well is the area of human-in-the-loop systems, whereby we are saying that, there need to be human oversight in terms of the AI systems, but from the design and as well as deployment, so humans must guide and when needed override automated systems. So this also includes, the reinforcement learning with human feedback and clear thresholds for the interventions in the high-risk domains. I think the last point that I just want to focus on is, our participation in terms of the global AI governance has been uneven. The potential and agency are there. So from our side as a country, in terms of the policy that we're currently developing, so we are looking, to leverage on the areas, that have already developed some frameworks, which include your African Union Data Policy Framework. So we are building the models, of governance rooted in equity, sovereignty, as well as innovation. But also we see that, AI is not just a technology tool. We don't want that AI to replace humans, but we want the AI to actually work with the humans in terms of, assisting us in some of the most pressing needs of our society.
Thank you very much. Especially the local relevance of AI governance will be also discussed in our round later. So that is a very important point you made. Thank you very much. Jalak, we would love to continue with you. You are working at an academic institution, but you are also very rooted in the cooperation with the civil society. So if you could bring these two perspectives together, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think, when we think about AI governance, one is, what is the process and input into the creation of AI governance, either internationally or domestically? And then, actually, what is the substance of, what we are structuring AI governance as? And if I can first just take a couple of minutes to talk about the process. I think, if we learn from the past, it's very important to have multi-stakeholder input as any sort of governance mechanism is being created, because different stakeholders sitting at different parts of the ecosystem are able to bring forth different perspectives, and we end up in a more balanced environment. I think one of the things that we've increasingly seen is a shift towards multilateralism. And I think, at the IGF is a perfect place to talk about the need to focus on multi-stakeholderism and enabling meaningful participation, and not participation that is being done as a matter of form, but participation that actually impacts outcomes and outputs. I think the second piece that I want to talk about when I talk about process is increasing the need to meaningfully engage with a broader cross-section of civil society, academia, and researchers. So not only those bringing perspectives from the global north, but those bringing valued and informed perspectives from the global south. The way, a toaster works in the United States versus the way it works in Japan versus the way it works in Vietnam or India is pretty much the same. But AI as a technology will be shaped in the way it functions, in the way it impacts very differently in different contexts. And I think perspectives from a cross-section of countries, from a cross-section of civil society across the global majority is very important to enable. And we can talk about maybe later in this conversation what some of the challenges are that have been preventing that currently. I think if we talk about the substance of AI governance, one is the piece around how do we really truly democratize access to AI? We've seen a lot of technology development historically has been concentrated in certain regions. At a moment in time when we're talking about the WSIS Plus 20 review, I want to go back to something that was sort of articulated in the Tunis agenda, which spoke about facilitating technology transfer to bridge developmental divides. While it's happened perhaps with ICANN and ISOC supporting digital literacy and training, there's sort of been less substantial moves to operationalize on the equitable access to technology. So I think in this context, it's very important to think about how from the get-go we enhance capacity of countries to create local AI ecosystems so that we don't have a concentration of infrastructure and technology in certain regions. We talk about mechanisms such as open data set platforms, some kind of AI commons, and really think about how do we democratize access to this technology so that we have AI for social good, which is contextually developed for different regions and different contexts. And I think the last point I want to talk about is regulation and governance is not a bad word. Very often I'm hearing conversations about, we've talked about risk, let's focus on innovation now. I think that's creating a false sense of dichotomy. I think they have to go hand in hand. And I think in the past, the mistakes that we've made is sort of letting, not sort of developing governance mechanisms from the get-go. And it doesn't have to be heavy governance and regulation from the get-go, right? I think at this stage, and Melinda was talking about the fact that we don't understand what the risks are. So we need to be documenting risks. We need to be carrying out AI impact assessments. This has to be done from a socio-technical perspective so that we really understand impacts on society, impacts on individuals, because otherwise, we're going around in circles talking about we don't know what the risks are, we don't know what the harms are, we don't know how it's going to impact us. So let's start setting up mechanisms, whether it's sandboxes, whether it is AI impact assessments, whether it is audits. I know that we'll go back to conversations on, but there's a regulatory burden to this. It's going to slow down innovation. But are there ways we can start to think about how we can operationalize these in light touch ways so that we can parallelly start to understand what are the harms, what are the impacts that are coming up, so that we don't create path dependencies for ourselves later on, where then we're just doing Band-Aid solutions. Rather, we are able to shape the evolution of technology such that it's beneficial to our society and individuals, rather than landing up in a space where it's developed in a direction we didn't quite sort of envisage, and we didn't realize the unintended consequences that would come with shaping it in a particular way. I'll stop here and then come in with more points later.
Thank you very much. We will also come back to the role of IGF, but also on how we could use tools for collaboration and exploring AI governance on a more concrete level. Jovan, you're from an academic background, I would say, but you also have a lot of practice in AI. You call yourself a Takumi master in AI. We would love to hear a bit more on your perspective, observing either IGF's role in AI, but also on how AI is governed in Europe.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's a really great pleasure to be today here. When I was preparing cognitively for the session, I asked myself how we can make a difference. And one point which is fascinating is that in 3 years' time, AI landscape has changed profoundly. Just 3 years ago, when ChatGPT was released, it was magical technology. It can write you poetry, it can write you thesis, whatever you want. And with the time, at that time, you remember the reactions were, let's regulate it, let's ban it, let's control it. There were knee-jerk reactions, let's establish something analogous to the nuclear agency in Vienna for AI, and there were so many ideas. Fast forward, today we have a realism, and for those colleagues from Latin America, metaphor could be that AI governance is a bit of a magical realism. Like Llosa, Marquez, and others. You have a magic of AI like any other technology. And I guess many of us in this room are attracted to internet and the AI and digital because of this magical element. But there is a realism. And I will focus now on this realism. First point is that AI became commodity. We heard yesterday that in China there are 434, as of yesterday, large language models. I think similar statistics is for other countries worldwide. Therefore, AI is not something which is just reserved for a few people in the lab. It's becoming affordable commodity. It has enormous impact. One impact is that you can develop AI agent in 5 minutes. Exactly, our record is 4 minutes, 34 seconds. That's basically unthinkable. Only a few years ago, it was a matter of years of research. That's the first point. Therefore, the whole construct about risks is basically shifting towards this affordable commodity. Second point is that we are now on the edge where we will have basically AI on our mobile. And then the question we can ask is, today we will produce some knowledge here in our interaction. Should that knowledge belong to us, to IGF, to our organizations, or to somebody else? Therefore, this is the second point of bottom-up AI. We will be able to codify our knowledge, to preserve our knowledge, individual or group, family, and that will profoundly shift AI governance discussions. And the third point in this context, which I would like to advance in this introductory remark, is that we have to change our governance language. If you read WSIS documents, both Tunis and Geneva, the key term was knowledge, not data. Data was mentioned here and there. Now, somehow, in 20 years' time, I hope it will be reflected in WSIS plus 20, knowledge is completely cleaned. You don't have it in GDC, you don't have it in the WSIS documents, you have only a data. And AI is about knowledge. It's not just about data. That's interesting framing issue. In discussion, I hope that we can come to some concrete issues about, for example, sharing weights, through that sharing our knowledge, the way how we can protect our knowledge, especially from perspectives of developing countries. Because we are on the edge of the risk that that knowledge can be basically centralized and monopolized. And we had already experiences in early days of the internet where the risk that anyone can develop digital solution, internet solution, ended that at the end of the day that just the few can do it. And that wisdom should help us in developing AI governance solution, and we can discuss concrete ideas and proposals.
Thank you very much, Jovan, also for the references to the whole history of the internet. I think that's always great to have here as expertise on the panel at IGF. Thank you all for setting the scene. I think we got already an idea about the different perspectives we have here and also the possibilities for synergies, but maybe also for conflict. And that's also a bit our role as moderators to bring in these two different possibilities in you being on the panel. We would love to start now a more open round of discussion here We have prepared questions for you. We will start, but then we will also hope that something evolves in between you and that you can also refer to each other and answer a bit of the questions you've already put in the room here. But first of all, we would start with you, Mlindi, in terms of also giving us an idea. You already spoke about, the local relevance of AI, how to insert that into global processes. And as South Africa is currently holding the G20 presidency, how will you make sure within your functions that the local relevance of AI and the AI frameworks that South Africa also has established will be included in the global dialogue here?
Thank you, Kathleen. I think it's important to know that, the AI is a priority in terms of our G20 presidency. I think it's because we see that, the reason why we put it in there, we also picked up that, how we then govern it, it will determine how equitable, inclusive, and just how our societies will actually be tomorrow. So from our approach, so what we have tried to do is to ground, the governance in two complementary dimensions. Which one being a macro foresight as well as micro precision. So from the macro foresight point of view, we look on this on AI from the long-term view, and also to recognize, its impact, in society for a much longer period, shaping, our economy. So, but also from our G20 agenda, then we are championing the development of a toolkit which will try to reduce the inequalities, connected to the use of AI. So this toolkit also seeks to identify the structural and systematic ways in which AI can both amplify and redress the inequality, especially from the global south. But also we see that, this foresight requires, the geopolitical realism. Because, AI, we see that it cannot be, dominated by, a handful of countries or private sector actors, but it has to be, multilateral, multi-stakeholder, as well as multi-sectoral. So that is why then, we are working on expanding, the scope of the participation, bringing more voices from the continent, from the global south, and also some of the underrepresented communities in terms of the center of the AI governance dialogue. But also, if we were to look, then matching, the macro vision with the micro precision, whereby we're looking on the ability to address granular context-specific realities. So, as I highlighted before, that we see that there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to AI. So, from there on, then we advocate, for the context-aware regulatory innovation, so which include your regulatory sandboxes, human-in-the-loop mechanism, but also adaptive policy tools that can be calibrated to sector-specific risks and benefits. But also, one of the areas that we are focusing on as well is to ensure that we do capacity building, develop local talent, research ecosystems, as well as ethical oversight mechanisms, because we believe that the AI governance must be owned as much as, for all sectors of our economy, being on the rural areas to the cities and all that. But also from our presidency, we also aim to bridge, the governance within the regional frameworks. So we align with the African Union's Emerging AI Strategy, the NEPAD's Science, Technology, Innovation Frameworks, as well as the regional digital policy harmonization through the SADC. So we see that this integration at regional levels needs are peripheral, but also they are foundational in terms of, the global governance agenda. I think finally, in terms of our G20, we just like to call our partners and international institutions to support the distributed AI governance architectures so that, we can all be inclusive and, we can have the equitable as well as, make sure that the benefits of AI can have, much meaningful in terms of our society, while we are also addressing, the associated risk, related to AI. I thank you.
So, Melinda, moving to you now, actually, Jalak stole my thunder when I was preparing the follow-up question to you, because I think she touched in a point that I'm sure several in the audience and online have thought when you were speaking about what she called the false dichotomy between innovation and protecting human rights, right? Because at the end, the objective of governance, if it's done in an alignment with the international human rights law, is to protect human rights for all, not only for the companies, right? So how you respond to this, right? You framed, of course, very briefly, as if it was an antagonism between those two things. At the same time, we know all companies, including yours, are investing in human rights departments, reports, and when there are specific issues like elections, on how to deal with these technologies and the risks, for example, for elections, but yet there is a lot of skepticism regarding the way the private sector, not only your company, is dealing with this situation. So if you could go a bit deeper on actually what Jalak was saying about what, in her view, is a false dichotomy on those two things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would agree, to be provocative back. I mean, I think that what I'm trying to say is that we need to look at everything together. And it seems that the debate about AI, and by AI, to be clear, I'm talking about advanced, generative AI. I think we tend to talk about AI kind of loosely, but the conversations to date at the kind of international institution level and the framework and commitment level have really been about the most advanced generative AI. Those conversations have largely been focused around risk and safety risk. And I think that's an important piece, of course, and we've implemented a frontier AI safety framework to address concerns about catastrophic risks. I think, however, the conversation around harm and risk, two things. One, I think we need to be very specific about what are the harms we're trying to avoid. And as you point out, a lot of the harms we're trying to avoid are harms that already exist that we've been trying to deal with. So people talk about misinformation, people talk about kids, people talk about all the things that are existing problems that have existing policy frameworks and solutions to varying degrees that differ in different places. What I am trying to convey is that we also need to be talking about enabling the technology. Not to say ignoring risk, not to say not having that conversation, but we're missing a key element if we're not talking about everything together. Because otherwise it becomes overweighted in one direction. And I don't think there's a global consensus around the idea that advanced generative AI is inherently dangerous and risky. I think that's a live question that a lot of people have opinions about, but there is a lot of interest and opinions about the benefits and advances of AI, and so I think that all needs to be brought together into a conversation. I will also say that there's existing laws and frameworks that are already in place, and so I think even that predate ChatGPT, right? And so we have laws around the harms that people are talking about around copyright and data use and misinformation and safety and all of that. We have legal frameworks for, and so I would like to see attention around how are those legal frameworks fit for purpose or not with the new technology, rather than seeking to regulate the technology.
Thank you. That's a very interesting aspect that Jalak was also touching upon a bit, especially on that idea whether we can use the already existing laws and frameworks in the context of this new technology. Jalak, how do you perceive this? Do we have all the rules already? And if not, what is missing?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of conversation around whether there is existing regulation that can apply to AI and whether there's need for more regulation. And I think there are several existing pieces of legislation that would be relevant in the context of AI, just to name a few: data protection, competition antitrust law, platform governance laws in different countries, consumer protection laws, criminal laws. So yes, I think I also agree with Melinda's point that we need to think about how maybe some of these laws are fit for purpose. Do they need to be reinterpreted, reimagined, amended to account for a different context that AI brings in? I mean, if I can give an example, the way we've seen the need for traditional antitrust competition law to evolve in the context of digital markets. You know, when internet platforms came in, you could have said, we have existing competition law, we have existing antitrust law, and that's going to apply. And we have seen over the last couple of decades that it is not fit for purpose to deal with, you know, the new realities of network effects, data advantage, zero-price services, multiple-sided markets that have come in with the advent of internet platforms. Similarly, I mean, we already see a hot debate happening around intellectual property right laws, whether copyright law is well positioned to deal with the unique sort of situation that has arisen where, you know, companies are training their LLMs on you know, a lot of knowledge and data available on the internet, relying on the fair use exception. What was the intention of the fair use exception under copyright law? It was that big publishers should not amass a lot of knowledge with them, and it gives people like you and me access to use that knowledge and reference that knowledge and build on that knowledge. You know, it's an interesting situation where you have large companies now sort of, you know, leveraging fair use. So I think, you know, we already have courts around the world, you know, dealing with this issue. I'm sure legislatures are going to deal with it. And it's a question that I think as a society we have to think about is, yes, you know, there is, you know, development and new things that these companies are doing. You know, fundamentally, maybe there's a transformation that they're doing when they're building on this, but you know, what are we losing out? What are the advantages in weighing all of that to think through? I think coming back to, you know, the false dichotomy point, I want to go back to that. I think, yes, we know a lot of harms that have already arisen in the digital and internet platform context. We're well aware of that, and we're looking out for that. Civil society, academia, researchers, as you know, we see AI, and if we're talking more specifically about LLMs. But those are existing harms that we're looking for. There are a lot of harms that we don't know may exist. And just to give an example, I don't think 15 years back we thought about the kind of harms social media platforms would have on children. It just wasn't something that was envisaged. I mean, maybe someone could have envisaged, you know, CSAM content, but you know, the mental health impacts, the kind of cyberbullying, the extent and nature of it, a lot of this is unintended and unenvisaged. And I think unless we are scrutinizing these systems, and it's not only a question of catastrophic risk. I think you know, we have to think about individual level impacts and societal level impacts. And unless we're engaging with these systems and understanding these systems from the get-go, those impacts and implications and negative consequences will only surface 5 to 10 years from now. And we cannot only rely on, you know, while it's wonderful to see companies heavily investing in human rights teams, trust and safety teams, you know, as a space, we didn't have trust and safety 10 years back. So it's a new space that has grown. You have so many professionals coming into this space with specialized skill sets, and it's great to see that. But we've also seen that companies have never been particularly adept at only working under the realm of self-regulation. I mean, and this is across industries, I'm not only pointing to tech, you know, we've seen that time and time again over the last 150 years of, you know, really, you know, when we talk about industrial regulation that's been coming through. So I think we have to move beyond this sense that companies will self-regulate. Very often they don't disclose harms that are apparent to them. And we need external regulators, we need communities to be engaging, a bottom-up approach, civil society to be engaging, multilateral institutions to be coming in. We need the development of guidance, guidelines to operationalize the AI principles that we've all been talking about and working on over the last 5, 7, 8 years. So I think we have to move forward into the next phase of AI governance.
Thank you, very interesting. So now what's going to happen, I will do a follow-up question to Giovan, but then we are going to open to you. So if you want to start queuing on the available mics, you are welcome to do it. Giovan, let's back to the magical realism and the issue of getting back knowledge to the discussion. It's a very interesting point you raised. You probably remember when there was the Tunis round of the World Summit, UNESCO published a very groundbreaking report called Towards Knowledge Societies. And it's very interesting, until today, every week, that report is one of the most downloaded reports in the UNESCO online library, which shows that independently of what we are discussing here in these very limited circles, the people overall are still very much interested in the knowledge component of this conversation, right? So doing this preamble to ask you to go a bit deeper. So how we bring knowledge back to this conversation, of course, connecting with the new topics. Of course, data is a relevant issue. We can't ignore the discussion of data governance. But I mean, the South African presidency has 3 main topics, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Melinda: solidarity, equality and sustainability.
Yes.
And if you read that report of UNESCO of 20 years ago, connecting with the challenges of the then information society, you'll see those 3 keywords appearing maybe in different ways. So people like Manuel Castells and Nestor Garcia Conclini were telling those things. So what is your view on how we get back to this part, or this important part of the conversation when we are looking into the AI governance frameworks?
Sure. It's good that you brought this, by the way, excellent report. 2 reports are excellent, the UNESCO and World Bank report on the digital dividends. Those are landmark. What worried me was, I studied and I didn't want to bring it, but you told that you don't mind controversies. Even UNESCO, which set the knowledge stage with that excellent report, backpedaled on the knowledge in the subsequent years, which was part of the overall policy fashion. Data is, even in the ethical framework, the recommendation, data is more present. That's the first point. The second point, why people download it, they react intuitively. They can understand knowledge. Data is a bit abstract. Knowledge is what we are now exchanging, creating, developing. And my point is that common sense element is extremely important. And through that, through bottom-up AI, through, let's say, preserving knowledge of today's discussion, maybe excellent questions that we'll have. This is knowledge that was generated by us at this moment. And this is also back to Marquez and other magical realism. You have to grasp the moment. And it's technically possible, it's financially affordable, and it's ethically desirable, if you want this trinity. But let me just, on your question, just reflect on 2 points of discussant. There are many false dichotomies, including in the question of knowledge. I can list, you have multilateral versus multi-stakeholder, privacy versus security, freedom versus public interest. And we can label them as false dichotomies, but I think we should make a step forward. Ideally, we should have both, multi-stakeholder, multilateral, security, but sometimes you have to make trade-offs. And this is critical, that trade-offs are done in transparent way. That you can say, okay, in this case, I'm going to multilateral solution because governments have respective roles and responsibilities. You can find it in many other fields. And back to your question in this, bringing discussion to common sense, and the references that colleagues made. I would go not only 150 years or even Napoleonic Code, I would go to Hammurabi 3,400 years ago. There is a provision in Hammurabi's law. If you build a house, and if house collapses, the builder of the house should be punished with that sentence. that was the time. What we're
Harsh one.
harsh one.
We don't want that.
What we're missing today, let me give you one, just and with this I will conclude. Diplo has its own AI. We're reporting from this session. And let's hypothetical situation, our AI system confuses and says that two of you said, or all of us, something which you didn't say. And you go back to Paris and your boss say, hey, by the way, did you say really that? And said, no, I didn't say it, but Diplo reported. Now, who is responsible for that ethically, politically, legally? I'm responsible. I'm director of Diplo. Nobody forced me to establish AI system, to develop AI system. Therefore, we are losing a common sense which exists since Hammurabi, Napoleonic Code, till today. Somebody who develop AI system and make it available should be responsible for that AI system. There are nuances now in that, but the core principles are common sense principles. Therefore, in that sense, people, by downloading knowledge, they're reacting with common sense. I think in governance, AI governance, we should really get back to the common sense and being in position to explain to 5 years old what is AI governance. And it's possible. And I would say this is a major challenge for all of us in this room, and I would say policy community to make AI governance common sense, bottom up, and explainable to anyone who is using AI.
Thank you very much. I don't see a queue behind the mics yet, and I think we also have, there's someone. That is great. Welcome. Happy to have your questions now towards the panel. It would be great if you could say who you are, from which institution, and also to whom you would like to direct your question.
Thank you. So my name is Deanne Heward-Mills, and I'm the founder of a global data protection office called Heward-Mills. For those that don't know, under the GDPR, there's certain organizations are mandated to appoint a data protection officer, and that's an individual or an organization that has responsibility for independently and objectively reviewing the compliance of the organization when it comes to data protection, cybersecurity, and increasingly AI. So I'm a UK qualified barrister. I've been working in the area of governance for over 25 years, data protection focused and privacy focused governance. And I've been running this organization for 7 years, which I'm very proud to do as a sort of female founder. I know I'm a very rare beast. But importantly, I decided 5 years ago to go for this standard called a B Corp standard. And I don't know if you're aware, but B Corp is a standard for organizations that can demonstrate high standards in environmental, social governance, ESG. And so my sort of comment or recommendation is we oversee carbon sort of offsets and the sort of efforts of organization in terms of demonstrating ESG. And I had a thought about, would it be an idea if organizations could also demonstrate their social offset? So, for example, if you are a tech business or a health business using AI, would it be sort of an idea that you document the existing risks, think about foreseeable risks, and think about actually how you could offset those risks in an objective way, and to have an independent overseer of that type of activity? I just thought I would throw that out there to the panelists, because we're thinking about creative ideas of making sort of AI governance tangible and explainable. And I wondered, for example, if that were the sort of requirement 15 years ago for social media platforms to demonstrate their social offset, what sort of world we might be in today.
Thank you very much. So I think it was not specifically directed to someone on the panel. So whoever wants to take that question, I'm looking at you, Melinda, but I think it might be relevant for others as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a start at it. I think that that exact kind, what you're talking about is really a risk assessment process that is objective and transparent and auditable in some fashion. I think that is you're right, the basis of kind of the GDPR and accountability structure that so many data protection laws have been built on. I think increasingly we see it in the content regulation space, particularly in Europe as well, that there are risk assessments and mitigations and transparency measures that can be assessed by external parties. And interestingly, we are seeing that in some early AI regulation attempts. I speak most fluently about what's going on in the US, but we are seeing very similar structures around identifying, documenting risks, demonstrating how you're mitigating them, and then in some fashion making that viewable to some set of external parties. I do think that is a proven and durable type of governance mechanism that makes a lot of sense. I think we still come to the issue, however, of what are the risks that are, and how are they assessed. And I say that because it is a particularly thorny challenge in the AI, particularly in the AI safety space. And there's healthy debates around kind of what risks are tolerable or not. But I do think as a framework that makes a lot of sense, and there are a lot of professionals who already work in that way, and companies already have those internal mechanisms and structures. So I would be surprised if we didn't land in a place like, and in fact that's what the EU AI Act essentially proposes as a structure.
But sorry, just a quick follow-up question, Melinda. But in that case, even if there is no consensus about what are the risks, the transparency that you were saying that you also agree is part of the solution, right? The companies don't need to be forced in agreeing on the risks, but they need to be transparent in telling the stakeholders what are the issues they consider risks and how they are mitigating, right? Because the problem maybe is to say, this is a risk, you need to report on that. But when the requirement is report on how you do risk assessments, then it's a different ballgame, right?
Yeah, I think the trick, I'm thinking about this through the lens of an open source model provider, and this is another tricky area of AI governance and regulation. How you govern closed models and open models may be very different. And so we do all kinds of testing and risk assessment and mitigation of our model, and then we release it for people to build on and add their own data to and build it for their own applications. We don't know how people are going to use it. We don't know how they end up using it. We can't see that, and so we can't predict how the model will be used. So I think there's just nuances as we think about this in terms of who's responsible for what. I do think some of it's common sense, who's using it. But so I think that's part of the value chain issue that people talk about.
I see that also, Lindy, you wanted to react to the question.
No, thank you. No, I think for me, the important thing is, that is why for us as policymakers, we just want everybody to play fair when it comes to AI. There are areas that we understand that, self-regulation will be there from the organizations, but all is important is to make sure that at least we can look on all these risks that are emanating and make sure that we all deal with those risks collectively, both from the private sector as well as from the government, because from us as government, we don't want to be seen as, doing like the hard regulation and all that, which might end up, stifling innovation. But we want to make sure that, everybody can be protected, but while also from the private sector point of view, you can also derive the value that you want to derive from the AI systems. I think that's what is important. But also the other area that I've touched on before, the area of explainability, is actually very important because, you actually use these models and, they might have, some decisions that can be very harmful to human lives. So that's why then we say that you need to have, these decisions being explainable. But then it also touches to say that whenever the model does a decision, it needs to have considered the broad aspects of data sets, from various demographics as well, to make sure that You don't look on a few demographics and say that, okay, no, the model can actually take a particular decision based on, the small amount of data that you've actually trained the model on.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And that's also, I think, a big achievement of the open source community to really stress that factor of explainability, what is happening actually within the data and within the models. Yes, we would love to move further on with on-site questions, and we switch to this microphone. Yes, happy to hear your question.
Thank you very much. So my name is Kunle Olorundare. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm the president of Internet Society, the Nigerian chapter, so to say. And we are into advocacy and stuff like that, so to say. So my concern is this. I know it's just about the right time for us to start discussing AI governance. There's no gainsaying that. However, there are issues that we really need to start to look at critically. And one of those issues has to do with the way data is being collected. I listened to Jovan the other time when he was emphasizing the issue of knowledge. I agree 100%, right? Because the end product of artificial intelligence is knowledge, so to say. However, how we gather this data, I think it's very important. Why I'm saying that is because we are looking at an AI that is going to, be inclusive, that we be able to have value for every community, so to say. And you will agree with me that this data gathering is being done by experts, and for every individual person, right? Everybody has his own bias. So I believe that whatever data you gather is as inherently flawed as the bias of the person that has gathered the data in the first place. So we need to start looking at how we are going to bring inclusivity in how we bring all this data together, considering all the multi-stakeholders. I think that is very important. That is on one hand. And for me, I think it will get to a stage that even this AI we are talking about is going to become DPG, Data Public Goods. I'm saying that because it's going to be available to everybody, and everybody should be able to use it for whatever purpose they want to use it for. But before we get there, how do we ensure that we put everybody on the same pedestal in the sense that we need to have a framework that is universal? I listened to Melinda too when she was talking about the framework, and I began to see some kind of, different frameworks coming from, different stakeholders. So we need to sit down and bring all these, frameworks together so that we can have a universal framework that's going to speak to issues that bother everybody. And the AI we're going to have at the end of the day is going to be universal, and it's going to be able to take care of everybody's concern. So I want the panelists to react to this. I think Jovan and probably Melinda should be able to react to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Jovan, do you want to go first?
Just a quick, excellent points and question. 2 comments. Both are controversial, but first one is more controversial. We have had a lot of discussion of cleaning biases. And I'm not speaking about illegal biases, biases which are basically insulting people's dignity. That's clear. That should be dealt even by law, but let alone that. But we should keep in mind that we are bias machines. I am biased. My culture, my age, my, hormones, whatever, are defining what I'm saying now, or what questions you ask. Therefore, this obsession, which is now calming down, but it existed, let's say, 1 or 2 years ago, with cleaning bias, was very dangerous. Yes, illegal biases, biases that threaten communities, definitely. But I would say at that point, we have to bring a more common sense again into this. Second point that you mentioned is about knowledge. Knowledge, like a bias, should have attribution. Financial, legal, this. The question you ask is your knowledge, build on your understanding and other things. The problem currently in the debates is that we are throwing our knowledge into some pot where we don't know. It's like, I call it AI Bermuda Triangle. And it's disappearing, and suddenly we are revisiting it. I'm even testing big systems in our lab in Diplo. We are testing where we put very specific knowledge, contextual, and we realize that it is taken, repackaged, and then not sold yet to us, but maybe in the future. That's a critical issue. Your knowledge, knowledge of local community in Africa, Ubuntu, oral knowledge, written knowledge, belongs to somebody or should be attributed. Shared with the through universal framework, definitely, but attributed. That's critical issue when it comes to knowledge, and also to your, Guillermo, previous question, what we should do with the knowledge. And again, instruments are there. And the risk is that confusing AI governance discussion, and, well, everything and anything, magical realism a bit, is basically missing the core points. And it is like baby crying. Instead of answering the question with existing tools, we are giving the toys to the baby, which is discussion on ethics, philosophy, which I love philosophy. But there are some issues that we can solve with existing instruments related to your question of bias and question of knowledge.
Melinda, before you react as well, I look at Jalak's face and I see that you might not agree with all of the points mentioned by Jovan, especially possibly the one that bias in data can be neglected. Is that something you're thinking about?
I mean, I don't disagree with him, actually.
Please.
I think there is a reality that there is a level of bias in all of us. And it's not that the world is completely unbiased. It's not that when judges make decisions, there's no bias over there. And ultimately, AI is trained on data from this world, and biases will get embedded into that. They're trained on existing data sets which capture societal bias. I think the difference is with human decision making. In many contexts, we have set up processes and systems, and there has to be disclosure of the thinking and reasoning going into it. And that can be vetted if someone raises an objection. I think with AI systems, that's the challenge, is explainability has, in many contexts of various kinds of AI systems, has been challenging to establish. And I think that's a question that is still being grappled with. So I think and I think disclosure of use of AI systems in various contexts, and whether someone knows that an AI system is being used and they are being subject to it, and then the kind of bias that comes into decision making that impacts them, I think that's the other piece to it.
Thank you. Melinda, the question was also towards you.
Just two quick thoughts. I think it is critical that AI works for everyone. And so part of that is making sure that we do have the data, that there is a way of either training a model on the data or fine-tuning model on as representative of data as possible. I think that's a foundational key concept. I also think that there needs to be a lot of education around AI outputs. And so when people are interacting with AI, they understand that what they're getting back may not be the truth, right? Like, what is it? It's actually just a prediction about the next right word. And so I think we're at the very early stages of this in society. And so our expectations of what it is, what it should be, what these outputs should be relied on for, I think is very evolving. I do agree that when AI is being used to make decisions about people or their eligibility for services or jobs, that there is an extra level of concern and caution and requirements that should be added in terms of a human in the loop or transparency around a decision was made. I absolutely understand the concerns around that. So I think as a society, we get more experience and understand these tools more and what they should be used for and what they should not be used for. I think these questions will get more sorted out.
Thank you very much. So at IGF, we want to be as inclusive as possible. That's why we also have the online participation for people that can't be here and that can't be also maybe afford to travel here. And we have our online moderator, Pedro, behind the mic here. Pedro, if you could give us like 2 relevant questions from the online space that need to be addressed to the panel, that would be really great.
Perfect, thanks. We have a question from Grace Thompson directed to Jalak and then Melinda. What are the panelists' views about the consensus gathered in the Council of Europe Framework Convention on AI, Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law, the first international treaty and legally binding document to safeguard people in the development and oversight of AI systems? We, at the Center for AI and Digital Policy, advocate for endorsement of this international AI treaty, which has 42 signatories to date, including non-European states.
It's not really going through, Pedro. We have difficulties to understand you, I think
Oh.
so as well. Can you give us maybe the two main words that need to be discussed? Was it the EU AI Act in the first one?
The Council of Europe Framework Convention on AI, Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law.
Okay.
The comments on the panel for Jalak and Melindez.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that went through okay-ish. Yeah? Jalak, do you want to react?
So are they asking about the framework?
Yes.
So I think, there has been a lot of conversation globally around what is the right approach to take. Melinda was saying we need to think about what systems need more scrutiny versus others, systems that are impacting individuals and people directly versus those that are not. There's been a whole conversation which we've referenced earlier in this dialogue around innovation versus regulation and what is the right level of regulation to come in with this point, what is too heavy, what is not enough. And I think I don't have the answer to that, right? I think in different contexts, it's going to be different. In countries which have a high regulatory capacity and context, there is more that they can do and implement. In countries that don't, we have to frame regulation and laws which work for those sort of regulatory and policy contexts. But what I think is really important is, at occasions like, for instance, the India AI Impact Summit, which is an opportunity because India is, trying to emerge as a leader in the global majority, to really bring together thinking from civil society, academia, researchers, industry, governments, particularly from the global majority, to talk about what would be the right way forward. Would it be borrowing from ideas that have developed in another context, and perhaps there are ideas that are relevant to pick up from there, but what is contextually and locally useful and relevant from within the contexts we come from, right? I mean, places like India and South Africa may have a lot of AI that is being developed, say, at a Sloan Kettering a health diagnostic tool, which is then brought in and deployed in the Indian context. But demographics are different. The kind of testing and treatments available at our primary healthcare, secondary healthcare, and tertiary healthcare settings are different. So there are a lot of differences. So how do we think about something like that, which may not be really a topic of discussion in other parts of the world? So I think in India and places like South Africa, we may have slightly different challenges to grapple with. And I think it's very important that those conversations happen as well.
Yeah, I think from the South African point of view, as my colleague has just highlighted here, one of the areas is the areas of human rights, and it's enshrined in the Constitution. So whatever you do from the technology point of view, you need to make sure that it doesn't really impact the human rights, as well as the Bill of Rights. So it's one of the things that we're trying to do to make sure that whenever then you actually put these types of technologies, they are not infringing on the rights of people. But also you'll find that, you do have, some of the other laws that we've got, like your Protection of Personal Information Act, so which says that, you can't just use my information within it, but then how do we then make sure that we can use your information for the public good? So now you're competing with these two laws. One is trying to use this information for the better good, but one is saying that you can't just use my information. So I think it's going to be quite a balancing act that we're trying to do, to say that what are some of the things that we can use to make sure that we can drive innovation, but what are the things that we need to do to make sure that we don't also infringe on the human rights as well as the information of the people.
Yes, thank you very much. I see there's further questions from the floor. Jovan, you will be reacting briefly because I think it would be also great.
Questions concrete on the EU AI Act and Council of Europe Convention. Just quickly, those are very interesting points. EU moved fast and probably too far. Now, as we're hearing from Brussels, there is a bit of revisiting of some provision, especially on the defining high-risk models through flops and other things. Council of Europe is an interesting organization. They adopted Convention on AI, but they're interesting organization because under one roof, first you have the Convention, but you have also human rights coverage. Next is also Human Rights Court. You have cyber crime. Council of Europe Convention is host of Budapest Convention. You have science. Therefore, it's one of the rare organizations that interplay between existing silos when it comes to AI could be basically bridged within one organization. Those are just 2 points on EU AI Act and the Council of Europe Convention.
Thank you very much. Let's pool last 2 questions from the floor. I see 2 people standing behind the mic over there.
Yes, thank you. Well, my name is Pilar Rodriguez. I'm the youth coordinator for the Internet Governance Forum in Spain. And I wanted to follow up a little on what Ms. Jalak was saying about how countries can achieve AI governance and AI sovereignty if this doesn't lead to, let's say, an AI fragmentation. I'm not just thinking from a regulatory perspective, because we have the AI Act in Europe, the California AI regulation, China has this regulation, so doesn't that lead to more fragmentation? And coming from the youth perspective, is there a way to ensure that we have, let's say, a global minimum so that future generations can be, let's say, protected?
Thank you very much. Let's also take the next question of the person behind you.
Hi, I'm Ana from R3D in Mexico. It's gonna sound like I'm making a comment more than a question, but I promise that for Melinda there's gonna be a question, because I was very concerned of hearing how there was this underestimation about the risks of AI, making it sound like it's something hypothetical and not that it was actually materialized in several examples around the world. And Jovan was mentioning this topic of knowledge and education, while at the same time speaking about illegal biases, when I think that in reality, there has been several examples of how classism, racism, misogyny is affecting how people can access basic services around the world, or how police are predicting who is a suspect or not, so we shouldn't disinform people about the actual risks. But the question to Melinda would be related to the emergency crisis that we're living. And since she mentioned that companies such as Meta are doing these risk assessments, I wonder how Meta is planning to self-regulate, for example, when it hasn't done environmental or human rights assessments, when it has established hyperscale data centers in places like the Netherlands that had made people publicly pressure for them to stop being constructed there. So then you move them to global south countries or to Spain in that case, so that all the issues with extractivism, with hydric crisis, with pollution arrive to other communities where there hasn't been any consultancy, but you're claiming that there has. That would be my question.
Thank you very much. So 2 relevant points. One would be the point of fragmentation and the other one of global AI justice, basically. Melinda, do you want to react first?
Sure. I mean, I can't really speak to the data center piece. I think that was your question around kind of basically the energy needs for AI and where data centers are placed. Essentially, I can't really speak to that. I can say that I think we all know that the AI future is going to require a lot of energy, and I think that there are a lot of questions about where the energy needs are and where the solutions to those energy needs are going to come from. But I can't speak in any detail about how particular decisions are made.
And in terms of fragmentation, that was part of the first question, right? The fragmentation of AI governance, having so many initiatives, so many different stakeholders. That is also basically then the question, how could you, coming from different sectors and regions, cooperate more in that area? Is there an idea here on the panel how that could look like? Who would like to react on that?
Was the question how to avoid?
How different sectors and regions could cooperate even better on AI governance, how to counteract against that fragmentation that might also occur from the blooming landscape of AI governance.
But we have to define what is fragmentation, Having the AI adjusted to Indian, South African, Norwegian context, German, Swiss, whatever, is basically fine. Probably the communication or exchanges should be done by some sort of standardization about the weights. Weights are basically the key element into AI systems. Therefore, we may think about some sort of standards and to avoid the situation that we had with social media. If you are on one platform, you cannot migrate with your network to the other. Now, Digital Services Act in UAE is trying to mitigate that. But the same thing may relate to the AI. If my knowledge is codified by one company and I want to move to the other platform company, whatever, there are no tools to do that. My advice would be to be very specific and to focus on the standards for the weights, and then to see how we can share the weights, and in that context, how do we share the knowledge?
So joint standardization, Mlindi?
Yeah, I think from the continent, we started, this governance as early as 2020, 2021, when we developed the AI blueprint for the continent. And I think from there on, the African Union also worked into developing the AU AI strategy, but also the individual member countries are also developing their policies and strategies, So I think there is not much fragmentation, but it's just that, from the grassroots level, you'll find that each country will have, its particular priorities that they would like to focus on. But I think generically, and if you were to look in all the, published policies and strategies and legislations, you'll find that AI normally generally addresses, more of the core principles, the issues of ethics, the issues of bias, the issues of risk. And I think even from the South African point of view, from the policy development point of view, the one that we are currently finalizing now, we are actually advancing, some of those aspects as well. I think we are looking on this thing, but from the grassroots level, from the country level, I mean, you'll find that you're not going to have it's exactly the same, but it's not that they are also always disjointed as well, but it's also that different priorities as well. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. I think there is a concern that in the drive for innovation, there's a race to the bottom in terms of the adherence to responsible AI, ethical AI rights frameworks. We have several existing documents ranging from the UDHR to the ICCPR, which can be interpreted, which through international organizations, norm building can happen, which sets a certain baseline. I think the IGF, as WSIS Plus 20 review happens, I think the IGF should be strengthened to really help with not only agenda setting of the action lines, but also as a feedback loop into CSTD, the WSIS forum, and other mechanisms where there is holistic sort of input from multi-stakeholders going into these processes. which accounts for many of the concerns that have been raised, ranging from environmental concerns to, impact of extraction in global majority contexts. It could be questions of labor for AI, whether it's labeling and, a lot of like worker related concerns. So I think all of this needs to be surfaced. And then these conversations need to feed back into the agenda setting as well as, the final outcomes that we have. Because I think that level of international coordination, both at the multilateral level but at the multi-stakeholder level, is important. And we have to all sort of come together and work together to find sort of ways to set this common baseline so that we don't sort of, in the race for, getting ahead, we don't sort of lose focus on our common values that we have articulated in documents like the UDHR.
Thank you. So now we are walking towards the end. So if the online moderator has a very straightforward question.
Yes, we have one from Michael Nelson about the two sectors. The two sectors that are spending the most money on playing AI are the finance sector and the military. And we know very little about their successes and failures. So he would like from the panelists, especially from Jovan and Melinda, what are their fears and hopes about those two sectors?
Question is about AI.
Especially finance sector and the military. What are your impression on those?
Okay, so fears and hopes, finance, military, but then I will give the floor back to all of you. 1 minute to, if you want to comment on that. And within this 1 minute, what is your key takeaway of this session? So let's start with you, Melinda.
Okay. I don't have an answer on the finance and military sector hopes and fears, to be honest. We are very focused right on adding AI personalization to our family of apps products. I'll leave the finance and military to others. On the key takeaway from the session, I think it really is interesting to take stock of where we are at these meetings. I've been at the last couple IGFs, and I think the pace of discussion and kind of the developments in the space are really fast, right, and fast moving. And so I'm encouraged, and I would encourage us all to keep having these conversations. I think multi-stakeholder will be the word that everyone is going to say here, but it really is a unique, important role that the IGF plays in bringing people together. I know we have a lot of Meta colleagues here. We take everything we hear here back home and talk to people and inform our own direction. And so I think let's keep having these conversations. I think the convening power is the most important contribution right now in this space of bringing these particular voices together.
Thank you. Jovan?
On military and AI, it's obviously getting, unfortunately, center stage with the conflicts, especially Ukraine and Gaza, together with the question of use of drones. There are discussions in the UN with the laws, the lethal autonomous weapons or robot killers. Then the Secretary General has been very, very vocal for the last 5 years to ban killer robots, which basically is about AI. What is my take from it? Awareness building, education. At Diplo, we run AI apprenticeship program, which is explaining AI by developing AI. People learn about AI by developing their own AI agents. And I would say, let's demystify AI, but still enjoy in its magic.
Thank you. Jalak?
Yeah, I think, my sort of final thoughts would be, I think we need to learn from the past, the successes of the past, things like, the multi-stakeholder model, successes we've seen in international cooperation, but we also need to learn from the past in terms of mistakes that have been made around governance, around technology, and not sort of repeat those. And I think we need to continue to work together to build a robust and wholesome, impactful, beneficial digital ecosystem.
Thank you, Melini.
No, I think from my side, I just want to say that, AI need to be anchored in the human rights. We need to make sure that the technology empower the individuals, but also when it comes to innovation, we need to do that responsibly by looking on the adaptive governance models, which includes like your regulatory sandboxes. But I think the last point that I want to touch on is the issue of collaboration, aligning, the national, regional, as well as the global efforts in terms of ensuring that, the AI benefits, are spread across, everybody in our society. I think those are my final thoughts.
Thank you very much. So now I have the very difficult task to try to summarize it, which would be impossible, but just the disclaimer, whatever I'm going to say now is full responsibility of Guilherme Canella chat. It's not any of you, right? But I think there is an interesting element in this conversation that when many years ago I was involved in some of these similar debates, AI governance, etc., the first thing that appeared was bias, and bias appeared very late in our panel, which is a good sign, because the first things that appear were the processes, even if we disagree, right? The dichotomy, the eventually false dichotomy between innovation or risks, but all those keywords that we spoke, risks, innovation, public goods, data governance, the knowledge, bringing knowledge back, those are actually more structured frameworks that looking into the real but these very specific issues of bias or disinformation, of conspiracy theories and so on. So I think this is a good sign for all of us, even if we disagree, as you noticed, that we are looking into something that we can take to the next level of conversation from a governance point of view. Because when we are too much concentrated in specific pieces of content rather than the processes, then the conversation becomes very difficult because it's related to polarizations, to specific opinions, which everyone has the right to have on what is false, what's not false, what is dangerous, and what is not danger. While when we are concentrating on transparency and accountability, on public goods, etc., all those keywords, they come with lots of interesting knowledge behind them on how we transform them in concrete governance, which doesn't mean only governmental governance, can be self-regulation, can be co-regulation, and so on. But we also, for obvious reasons, for lack of time, left important things out of the conversation that also need to be part of governance frameworks. For example, the issue of energy consumption of these machines should be part of governance frameworks, and it appeared very late today because of the time and so on. But I do think that the panel did a good job in putting also some of the divergences of this conversation, which is part of the game. Last thing I want to say is that, this is nothing related, this is not on the shoulders of the panelists or my co-moderator. I do invite you to think that be innovative is to leave no one behind in this conversation. When Eleanor Roosevelt was holding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on that famous photo, the conversation was, this was the real innovation. How we came together and put those 33 articles and in a groundbreaking way that is not solved into today. So what we really require is an innovation that includes everyone and not only the 1%. Thank you very much. Thank you, my co-moderator. It was a pleasure.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you. Maybe we can have like a